when you joined SoundCloud, the Martech setup was so bad, you couldn't really get a handle on how many messages were going out.
The platform could tell me how many messages it thought it sent, but we had all this stuff happening afterwards. We had
Interesting.
frequency caps. I see the document from 2019. We're having these issues. We should consider something else. I had over 200 questions. Each question had a response. We had a super aggressive timeline. One finalist, essentially, were saying we were crazy. But yeah, I think you could do that. And MoEngage had a project plan. This is how we would do that. So I was looking to see how many people we had in MoEngage. It was like 135 people in MoEngage.
Wow.
And again, SoundCloud is like 425 people. This customer engagement platform, it's a part of the product.
What's up, everyone? Today we have the pleasure of sitting down with Hope Barrett, Senior Director of Product Management for Martech at SoundCloud. Before SoundCloud, Hope spent over 6 years at CNN, scaling their newsletter program. In this episode, we explore SoundCloud's big migration and what it taught them about future-proofing Martech, why structuring Martech like a product team actually works, how to vet Martech vendors for real scale when you're under pressure, how their migration reshaped the whole marketing team, and how they let 135 people use their new warehouse native stack without breaking it. All that and a bunch more stuff after a super quick word from one of our awesome partners.
This episode is brought to you by Revenue Hero. You've invested thousands in your marketing funnel, targeted the right ICP, spent weeks A/B testing, and optimized for conversion at every step. Finally, a high-intent prospect fills out your demo form, and then nothing. Your nurtured lead sits in a queue while you chase them with, "How's Thursday at 2 p.m.?" Meanwhile, your competitor is already on a discovery call. That's not just frustrating, that's revenue walking away. With Revenue Hero, you can qualify, route, and book leads with the right rep, so your team can start real conversations right away. For the ops folks listening, Revenue Hero syncs meeting data to your CRM, auto-credits no-shows, recalibrates when reps go on vacation, and has a ton of smart features you won't find anywhere else. If you're spending to drive demand, don't lose it at the last mile. Visit revenuehero.io/demo today.
Hope, thank you so much for your time today. Truly an honor to have you on the show. Thanks for your time.
Thank you for having me, Daryl and Phil. Excited to be here. I've had a crazy schedule. I've been in Seattle, back to London, going to Berlin. So I'm super happy to be able to fit this in.
Awesome. Yeah, we had a bit of bouncing back and forth on like what we would talk about today. And you've actually talked about this big Martech transformation that took place at SoundCloud last year and a half. Scott Brinker actually hosted a webinar interviewing you about it, and you spoke about it at MAU in Vegas. I want to give you the chance to kind of reflect on the transformation now that it's kind of a year plus out and check in on how things are going today. So yeah, excited to dive into that.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, why don't we start at the beginning? I'm reading in the notes that when you joined SoundCloud, the Martech setup was so bad, you couldn't really get a handle on how many messages were going out. Performance was, it's hard to track performance. Like what did you do? And like, what did you do to assess, hey, the current tech stack's not working. We're actually just going to have to re-engineer this and rebuild this from scratch. Like what was the state when you came in, and what was the breaking point that led you to believe that, hey, we really need to make a big change?
Sure. So I will start at the very beginning. So I was previously at CNN, and my current sort of matrix manager at CNN had left CNN and ended up at SoundCloud. So he was working with SoundCloud, and due to challenges at CNN, I was laid off, and I was open. I was free. So he asked me, "Hey, I have this opportunity at SoundCloud. Would you be interested?" And I was looking for a full-time gig, but sure. I mean, it sounds interesting. I've never done that before. I'll see what's going on. So I was actually brought in to answer a specific problem. So the problem or the question was, hey, Nielsen attribution is going away. It's being deprecated. What can replace MTA? So I came in and I started to look at that question, and that was February. Because my current manager, I mean, I first met him when he was my client, AJC, in 2013. So I've known him for a very long time. The positive of that is he knows what I like to do, and he knows how I work, and we have a really good relationship. So yes, he asked me about this NTA question, but coming in, and he actually had the same realization when he came to SoundCloud. There was things that we had to do. So again, the first question was NTA, and there really isn't a great alternative right even now. But that, that led me down various paths. So I started to look at our mobile marketing partners. So we looked at our MMP. We actually did change out our MMP. Definitely the customer engagement platform. And then at CNN, I was working, I started doing something similar. I was doing vendor management. We were using a different platform. We were actually using Dell Global at CNN, but I sort of went from RFP. We had 10 vendors in our RFP at CNN, all the way to selection to nurture. I did all that at CNN. So that was my experience. I enjoyed it. So, when CEP or customer engagement platform at SoundCloud came up, that was again something I had experience with from the process perspective. So that was it's something I liked to do, and it was easy for me to step into. From a Martech perspective, we also had to change our Google Analytics because we were still using Universal. We had to go to 4, so we did that year. It was a very exciting year. So we did that, and I'm really just understanding how our marketing ops were working. So that was sort of all of what I did. So now I don't know if I got off topic, but that was coming in.
I think it's definitely fascinating. At what stage did you and maybe there's multiple points of this, but from a messaging perspective, especially when it comes to trying to message customers, did you get a sense that what you were using today couldn't cut it?
Mhm.
Or did that kick off sort of let's explore what else is out there? Or how did that go when you kind of got the sense that hey, our the way that we message customers isn't working today?
Now that's a great question. So I go into my background to sort of set the table, but something to know about me, I'm huge on customer service and customer support. I love working with partners. I often, sometimes I've gotten, slapped by legal, not necessarily here at SoundCloud. Hey, that's a vendor, it's not a partner. Partner has certain connotations, but I still use partner. I want to work with a partner. I want
Yeah.
someone who is invested in a relationship and outside of just pure commercial, right? So that's sort of what I come to. That's what I go to, or that's my go-to. So anyways, coming to SoundCloud, yes, we had a very old implementation. So a lot, our MMP was put into place in 2016. Our CEP was put into place 2016. And being at CNN at that time, I sort of know the landscape. And, based on our previous CEP that we were using, there was a lot of support infrastructure we had to use to actually use it. So, and that was, again, I had similar experience at CNN. So I sort of had that background already. And, if you have, we all know tech moves very fast. So if you put something into place and you don't really maintain it, you don't, do whatever, it ages and it decays, and eventually you have a lot of tech debt. So that was essentially the situation we were in. So we had a CEP, our customer engagement platform. We signed on with the vendor very early in their product lifecycle. We had to build a lot of support infrastructure to make sure everything worked. And when I say support infrastructure, we had things like frequency caps outside of the platform itself. So when you say, well, how did you not know how many messages you sent? Well, the platform can tell me how many messages it thought it sent, but we had all this stuff happening afterwards. We had
Interesting.
frequency caps happening afterwards. We had all these things going on. So end of the day, I really didn't know, because yes, the platform could give me a number, but it wasn't the real number. And over time,
And what
again,
does that
it just decayed.
what does that mean? Sorry, the frequency cap?
So for example, we would have, we don't want, a lot of our campaigns were data driven, right? So if you do something on SoundCloud, it could trigger a campaign. Well, if you say you were busy liking a track or something, right? We don't want to send you, every single time you do that, we don't want to send you a message saying, hey, thank you for liking a track. Say you liked, 20 tracks. We don't want to send you 20 messages saying, hey, thank you for liking a track. right? So we would have a frequency cap to say, hey, Daryl only needs one message a day saying thank you for liking a track. Or maybe we only want Daryl to get one message a week saying thank you for liking a good track. But this
Gotcha.
was things we couldn't build into the platform itself. So we had to
Mhm.
have support infrastructure to help do that. So that's just an example, but that's sort of what I mean.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
Yeah, I feel like most orgs, Hope, underestimate how much the cost of not switching accumulates silently in the
Mhm.
background. Like SoundCloud, you were saying, delayed this move since like 2019. You mentioned that the infrastructure was layered with like legacy systems because you were such an early adopter of that tool. There was functionality that didn't exist in
Mhm.
the product. So there's internal APIs, homegrown apps, and basically like this like Frankenstack around the CEP to work around and dated all the way back to like 2016, 2017, right? Like
Exactly.
what did the worst parts of that setup teach you about future proofing your Martech stack and how you think about that philosophy today?
Yeah. So I think my biggest takeaway is you want to be able to go as out of the box as possible. Every time you have a custom implementation, that is on both you and your partner to help maintain that. And typically that doesn't go very well. So the partner, they if they build something special for you, they have many other clients as well, right? So if they are going to release a new feature, who gets that new feature first? It's the main platform. It's the people using the out of the box product. Maybe they'll get around to getting you that new feature too with your custom implementation, but most likely not. I mean, that's been my experience, right? If you have a custom implementation, it's kind of on you to maintain. And that's what we were hearing, right? So, when we would have an issue, and we would go to our former customer engagement platform, it was like, well, yeah, you guys have that custom implementation. Go ask your engineers. And that's what we would hear.
Mm,
And ironically, I have a different vendor in a different space that I'm hearing the same thing from right now, right?
Mm.
Because we have another custom implementation that I am thinking about ripping and replacing. So yeah, but I mean, it just makes sense, right? If you're a vendor, you don't have time to maintain, 100 different customer implementations, so it's hard. And as a client, I understand, but I do want the new stuff too. So the way you avoid this problem is, if you can do something out of the box, or if you have to build support infrastructure, try to make it as transferable as you can, right? You don't want to really tie into something specifically that a partner has. You want to be forward looking, like this is what we need. How do I build it in a way that, vendor change tomorrow, I can easily change with that. I mean, those are my lessons learned from, this and other experiences.
One thing that makes this whole transformation from your perspective interesting is the role and the kind of unique structure you had when you came to SoundCloud. There's a lot of different philosophies when it comes to structuring Martech and who works in Martech. In my career, I've run lifecycle teams that owned a lot of the Martech and the
Mhm.
customer engagement platform stuff. But I've also been in like marketing teams at way smaller teams that the marketing ops team sits under there. We own a lot of that stuff, but you're at a bigger company in like larger enterprises. There's sometimes like a central Martech
Mhm.
team that is made up of a ton of engineers, especially when there is like custom tooling and custom solutions there. You lead Martech as a product function at SoundCloud, not under marketing or
Mhm.
engineering. Can you describe how your team fits into the org and how you kind of manage the balance between enabling marketers who are sending messages but also protecting engineering resources? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So I think in part our size kind of helps this because we're not, I mean, we're about 425 people, say. So we know each other. And the other thing that I think helps it is, you know, I've been like when I was at CNN, I was doing newsletters. I mean, newsletters are important and I'm a newsletter junkie, super, super important, but it's not intrinsic to like gathering news, right? That newsletter. It's just a reporting vehicle. Here at SoundCloud, I would say messaging is integral to the product, right? So when you are using the tool, we want to let an artist know that you liked their track. If you are DMing somebody, we want to make sure that they know that they have a new DM. right? So it's actually how people use the product. So if you think about it from that perspective, for us to be part of product growth marketing, it's really we're part of product. So for us, like, I am in the meetings with engineering, and really it's a very long acronym. It's like EPDMA, but it's like engineering, product, design, and marketing. We're all together. But again, if you think about SoundCloud as a product, I mean, it kind of makes sense because we're not just sending messages. I mean, we are sending like the messages that we're sending. They're not like, I mean, we do user acquisition and things like that, but it's really always tied to the product itself. So to me, that's a distinction between like maybe my time at CNN versus my time here, where a message that we're sending out, like if someone released, like I got a bunch of them this morning, like I follow a bunch of artists, right? And they started to release new tracks. Well, I got a series of messages saying, so-and-so released a new track. I mean, that's part of the product. I mean, that's going to make me want to go listen to this new track that was released. And it's not sort of a add-on where, hey, the marketers could be somewhere else doing marketing things and we have this product over here.
Yeah, it's a super cool way to think about it. Daryl, this makes me think back our conversation with Jeff Lee at Calm, who does the technical stuff for Lifecycle and messaging at Calm, the big meditation app. And he thinks very similar to you, Hope. Like he said, at first in his career, he was like allergic to marketing and sales. He hated emails, like could never convince himself to do that. But he's like an engineer, like born and bred. And what convinced him in messaging was this idea that messaging and Lifecycle is kind of a product in and of itself. And email is basically just a bunch of code and it's static, but it's sent to the inbox and people don't come back into the product. People love the Sunday newsletter that they send with like the new meditations that come out. So I feel like your answer kind of relates a lot to that. Do you agree?
No, for sure. I mean, we work collaboratively as a team. And if I go into so a couple Slack channels I could go into. If I go into my Mo Engage Slack channel, right? So we have a bunch of people from Mo Engage in there. We have data engineers in there. We have our Lifecycle team in there. We have people like me in there. We have lots of folks, lots of different parties, lots of different interests. But the bottom line is we're all talking about SoundCloud as a product, like SoundCloud the app, and like what are we doing to help, SoundCloud the app. A lot of our campaigns are data driven. So, it definitely presented challenges when we're migrating, but, we are using data. We're using triggers that the user is doing to send messages and to send, in apps and to send pushes or whatever. So, and even email. I mean, we do have a few newsletters, but even our newsletters are data driven. So for example, if you're a SoundCloud user, we will send you an email, a weekly newsletter that shows you, four tracks that you might be interested in based on your listening history using our recommendation engine. I mean, that's going out in an email, but that again, it's part of the product. So, I mean, we do have the traditional, like if you just sign up with SoundCloud, you're going to go welcome stream, and it might be 16 different emails over time that's helping you understand the product. That's probably more traditional, but a lot of what we're doing, it's really in response to how you're using the product.
Yeah, I love that. And then, in terms of your team, do you consider the marketers like your primary customers, or do you consider like the customer your primary customer? It's like, is it a balance of both? And I think the reason I ask is because, oftentimes working with marketers, they may want to maybe send out too many messages, or maybe, do this. And do you have to maybe play a governance role? How do you think about that?
Yeah, no, actually, it's a great question. I think sometimes when people think about marketing, they kind of think about brand marketing, right? And it's like, I think in when you're thinking about brand marketing, perhaps like, sending too many emails or things like that. I can 100% understand that. Here at SoundCloud, we have, again, people who are also tied into the product. So, each message we're sending out has a distinctive purpose. It's either, it's going to be that welcome flow. And when I think about the process of doing the welcome flows, and that was really the Lifecycle team. I work with them and I support them. But the Lifecycle team had the product team and themselves coming together to create the flows, right? Like what is going to happen what's going to happen at each point in time. So it's not just the Lifecycle's team, mandate, hey, create a welcome stream. They're working with product to figure out, okay, well, the people who are creating the tools that artists are using to upload tracks, like working together to figure out what makes the most sense to best educate an artist about how to use SoundCloud. So it's not just Lifecycle. So we really work very closely together, all aspects. So I know I talked about the Slack channel with all the people in there, but that's why it matters.
No, I think that's right on, and that's the best, I think, working model is where you're just part of a big team, and it sounds like it's very much like that. Well done.
Do you think, Hope, that your role in a product function helped you build internal consensus when it came to this big migration that you did, when you needed to make a change in customer engagement platforms? Like, how did you socialize the plan internally at first? I'm sure there's a lot of folks that were around initially when those decisions were made, probably a lot of turnover from folks that weren't there anymore. But like, what tactics actually worked to shift people from being hesitant to supporting you in this like big project, especially those like skeptical, folks of like making such a big move? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, no. So it's really like a multifaceted issue or situation going on there. So a few things that come to mind. One is we had new product leadership, right? So we had people who came from CNN. So that's how it's all sort of connected. A group of us from CNN at SoundCloud. But anyways, we had a new CPO who, came in with different ideas. I mean, our CEO at the time, his mantra was step by step. It was always about constant, iteration. Let's not wait for perfect and perfection. Let's keep moving, right? So I think it was a sort of a shift in mindset. Another thing is, SoundCloud has some of the best documentation I've ever seen. I could go back into, Confluence, and I see the document from 2019 talking about, hey, we're having these issues. We should consider, something else. So I can easily point to, well, wait a minute, this isn't a new problem. I think sometimes people, trick themselves to thinking, yeah, we're having this issue now, but it could get better, right? And if you think about all the work that goes into switching, I understand, right? It's a lot of work. So, maybe we'll heal itself. Well, that doesn't happen. So, I have this documentation from 2019 is saying, well, this is what we had then. We're having the same conversation right now. So there's that. As far as socializing, yes, it's helpful to have historical documentation, but also just talking to people, right? So when I started to work on the RFP, I was interviewing, and it wasn't just me. The head of our lifecycle team at the time was helping. We were interviewing all of our internal stakeholders to figure out like what concerns are you having now? What would you like to be able to do? And that was input that we used to create our list of questions for our RFPs. So by involving people early, you starting to get you socialize it, of course, but they know what's happening, and I think the other thing that was helpful is probably the structure. So at that point in time, I was actually a consultant. I wasn't a SoundCloud employee. I was sort of outside. I think my day-to-day task was this, right? So I didn't have a team I was managing. I was managing these processes. So that allowed me to move pretty quickly. So, but and then that's a big problem come because again, I was a consultant. I mean, sometimes if you see consultants come in, you're like, okay, they'll be gone. I'll just wait it out, right? So, fortunately, I didn't have that situation. But it's on me as a consultant to build those relationships and to say, hey, this is what we're doing. Be transparent. Like this is the research I had. Yes, I was looking at Crunchbase. I looked at financial, viability. I don't want to have I don't want to say this is the perfect vendor for us and then it goes under in a year, right? So I was looking at all those things, but being transparent about all the things I was looking at, I think helped build confidence that, I actually had a process, this process worked before. I could say that, but by showing my work, you can see what in my work before. So I think that was all helpful. But then again, having a product leadership team that, I think afterwards I heard more, well, yeah, we supported you, but we didn't quite think this was going to happen. But they could tell me that, right? So I was just moving forward. And, again, this is the type of thing that it's never fun, but it's not going to be fun a year later, right? If you wait a year, it doesn't get better. It's not going to be better and more fun then. You just have to do it. If you're having problems now, they're not going to heal themselves. It's not good. Based on the issues that we had, they're not going to get better. You're going to have to do work. So the question is, what type of work do we do? Do we do work to like rebuild our infrastructure? Do we find another partner? Do we work with our existing partner together and come up with a new solution? I mean, those are all options. And then we ended up choosing the path of looking for a new partner. But I mean, those are all different things we've had conversations about.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. And I really love your point about documentation too. Just around, it's almost like organizational journaling,
Yeah.
so we can look back to see what conversations we've already had. But yeah, let's talk a little bit about how you think about RFPs. When you were putting it together, like what were the main things that you wanted to see in the RFP? What did you learn from the process? Like, were there certain things that were really key? And then did you look back and say, oh, some of this parts of the RFP or some of these criteria, they actually weren't that big of a deal. Like maybe you could share a little bit of your learnings there too.
Yeah, so I actually love doing RFPs. I think this is the information Doug gave me, right? I love to know, and I'm the nosy person, the nosy part of me. I love to know what's going on. So that leads to loving RFPs. And I've done RFPs before. So I worked at a small digital agency, if then, and that's when I was first exposed to either responding to an RFP or doing RFPs. I did RFPs at CNN. So I had a process. I mean, over time, I built things that I thought, oh, this is a really cool idea. Let me do this too. Wait a minute, this isn't so great. So I didn't necessarily have a takeaway from this RFP process to say, oh, I did this, I probably shouldn't have. I already had a sort of a methodology. So the things that are important to me in an RFP, right? So one is like making sure that you gather information from all your stakeholders, right? You don't want to surprise someone, hey, look at all the stuff I did, and they had no idea, right? You don't want to be in that situation. So, involving people as soon as possible. Truly understanding what the problems are, right? So it's easy to say, hey, yeah, let's just find a new vendor. That's going to solve all our problems. That's one way to think about things, but that's probably not going to be successful either. So really understand what your problems are and what questions you're answering. So those are all things that I think even before you start writing your essay, you go into. I think it's the preparation. Like I think I had probably, I don't know, a 13-page document that I share with all my vendors or prospective vendors at the time to explain who SoundCloud was, the issues we're having, what we're looking for. Again, it was like 13 pages. And it had, some legalese in there, perhaps, like this is not getting this RFP and responding is not, indicative or doesn't say that we're going to have to accept you, all that, but it had lots of information. And part of me doing that was setting the table. I wanted to make sure all the vendors had or were coming back to me with the same information. So that was something like just initial homework, making sure all the vendors had the same information. I had very clear dates and timelines. So like I clearly pointed out, we're going to send out this RFP on the state. You have 3 days to respond to tell me if you want to participate. So I started doing things very, very clearly, very transparently, and it was across all vendors, right? When vendors had questions for me, every evening I would compile all the questions I got for the day and send them to all the vendors, right? So if, I don't know, if company A had a question, now all 6 vendors knew about it. And I did that routinely. I had an anonymous conference call, and some vendors realized, oh, anonymous. Well, maybe let me not sign in with my, Zoom background because that is no longer anonymous. It didn't matter for me though. The premise was, I want all the vendors on the call so that they can hear the questions being asked and the answers. If you want to reveal who you are, that's on you. Doesn't really matter to me. But we have that type of engagement. So, I was very active. It's not like I put an RFP out there and said, let me wait, a month and see what comes back. It was a very involved process from day zero all the way to the end. And I think that helped. Like when I went through our responses in the Excel sheets, I would have questions and I would be reacting to, vendors as they would, share their answers. We had a couple of rounds of that also. So I was very involved, the team here at SoundCloud, various people were involved. I would say, this is what someone asked, what are your thoughts? So that all helped. So I think that those are the types of elements that helped us have a successful RFP where we found a vendor that we thought we could work with. I mean, that said, if, going through all that, if you didn't have the right vendor, I would be, okay, I wouldn't want to have to do it a year later, but that's okay too, right? So it is a learning process, but hopefully, Daryl, that helps sort of answer.
Yeah, no,
the
I've heard it put this way, which might resonate with you, but like the way that you make the decision or the decision making process is what's really important. Sometimes the outcomes might not be what you wanted, but like if you took the time to, rigorously make the decision, you've done your best, And I think that's kind of how I interpret what you're saying.
This episode is brought to you by MoEngage and their new warehouse native CEP, which revolutionizes the way data should be seamlessly fetched, analyzed, and activated. Now you can use MoEngage Cloud Data Sync to sync your warehouse data with MoEngage and use it to segment audiences or personalize messages without any development. Just set and forget. Use MoEngage warehouse segments to create segments on your warehouse data without moving underlying events, properties, or proprietary segmentation logic, and activate them directly on MoEngage. Using warehouse data analytics, brands can also directly generate insights from their warehouse data. Your long search solution for seamless data sync, smarter segmentation, dynamic personalization, and delightful customer experiences ends here. Warehouse native CEP from MoEngage, making it easy, smart, and secure. Learn more at moengage.com. This episode is brought to you by our friends at Knack. I have the amazing pleasure of chatting with some of the greatest minds in marketing operations, but you'd be shocked at how many of them have the same issues when it comes to their campaign creation process. They're dealing with things like scaling, personalization, keeping assets on brand, render testing emails, working in rigid templates, and worst of all, having to hand code emails. But many of the leaders in the space are using Knack to eliminate these headaches. Knack is a no-code email and landing page creation platform that covers initial campaign requests right until the sync to your marketing automation platform. Knack improves the whole campaign creation process by bringing the building, optimization, testing, collaboration, and also translation functions all in a single spot. So you don't have to jump around and coordinate feedback between a bunch of different people or wait on developers for very simple edits. Because at the end of the day, marketing ops folks want to focus on process and efficiency. Marketers want to focus on creativity, and Knack makes sure you get both and then some. Check them out at knack.com. That's KNAK, and tell them we sent you.
I had over 200 questions, probably in 16 categories. I waited, like each question had a response. I waited, and it's not only myself. I think I probably, it's a lot, right? I waited every single response, but I had a team of, say, like probably 500 people, and they would maybe weigh or grade sections. But end of the day, I had a 1 to 5 on each response for 6 vendors. I had roll-up weightings for the categories. And then I could tell you the scores of my 6 vendors and where they were strong, where they were not. And I also had conversations with the vendors if they were interested afterwards. Say, this is why you were selected, this is why you were not selected. So, it was really a full process. But I think, that also helped me make sure I wasn't really missing anything, right? So hopefully transparent for the potential vendors, but also for me to make sure that I was buttoned up as I should be.
It sounds like it's such an in-depth process that you went through. I'm sure a lot of folks listening went through some shape or size of RFP at some point in their career or were involved in it. I know I've been a part of a few. It's never been that in-depth, though, to the point of having conference calls where vendors can join anonymously and ask questions. I think that's a brilliant idea and a really cool way of getting more information and making it as kind of like, I don't know, non-deferential. Because like a lot of the times, like you would have individual email threads with like all of the different vendors, and then like you start forgetting like what you said to one and who said what, and so like keeping it all open in the open, like there's no box around it, I think is a really cool way to go about it. All right, Hope, let's plug MoEngage a little bit. They're a big partner on the podcast, and I know you ended up picking MoEngage. You kind of mentioned that already. You had this like long-standing incubants that you were using for customer engagement. We don't have to name them. What did MoEngage demonstrate technically or maybe relationally that gave you the confidence throughout the whole RFP process that they could execute better?
So, I mean, we just talked about my 200 plus questions. Like, Jotin is, I think he's head of North American sales at MoEngage right now. I first met Jotin in this RFP process, and we developed a relationship because he had humor, but he was the one like I've been the responses from. We'd email back and forth almost daily, right? So I developed a relationship, but not only about MoEngage, it gave me a sense of how the potential vendors at the time would be to work with, right? So I think through that process, I mean, even yes, we're still working with MoEngage now, but Jotin and the relationship I developed with Jotin, that's memorable, right? It stands out. I didn't have that type of relationship with any of the other candidates. There's one vendor that I looked at where they went through the emotions. Like their answers were so brief and short that I wasn't even sure what they were telling me. And, I would have had to almost follow up on every single one. What do you mean by this? What do you mean by this? So it was whole spectrum. But, I think with MoEngage, at least for me, that relationship started during the RFP process because we had an engaging back and forth answering technical questions. And if you can have fun doing that says a lot, right? I think, but as far as like the selection process goes, we essentially had 3 finalists. One was a company I had worked with previously that had a really good relationship, and I loved working with them, but our ask was a little bit of a stretch for them. They were more of a traditional ESP, and we had the whole mobile component. The other two, the 2 finalists, I mean, from a product perspective, it was sort of relatively same. I think, we would have been able to get messages out with either the product. So what made the distinction? I mean, I think one was level of confidence. So we had a super aggressive timeline. So I had a contract that ended January 19th, 2024. Still remember the date. And, I was talking with MoEngage about contract, but even the sales process, right? I think I announced the finalists on Labor Day, so beginning of September, and when we had to do demos, right? So we had a very, very short timeline. So I would say during the demos, one finalist was like, yeah, I think you could do that, right? They essentially were saying we were crazy, but yeah, I think you could do that. And MoEngage had a project plan. This is how we would do that. So just the distinction, one, like having a project plan, even if you're taking some, liberties because you don't know everything exactly, that at least showed me how you approached it. And you're approaching it like this is doable. This is how we're going to get there. The other one was like, yeah, we'll do our best, right? So that was like the beginning of that. I think even during demo process is about transparency. Like yeah, we don't have this right now, but we could get that for you if you select this. Well, if you select us, we can get it for you by this date. I think having that type of certainty about your product, that knowledge about your product, comes through. So, and again, for me, that's very appealing because I like to work with vendors who know their product. I don't want to work with a vendor who has like a third-party integrator model. That is completely unappealing to me. So, through this process, I get to know the vendors who truly know their product and what type of support they would have. So, again, speaking of MoEngage, these are all signals that we saw, at least I saw during the RFP process, the demo process, and then afterwards. I mean, yeah. So that was sort of how we ended up with MoEngage as a partner. Yeah.
It's so crazy that, and it just resonates with me so much that the people part of it is so important. Who are the people that you're working with? And even with my own team, when we're doing some vendor evaluations, the thing that really stands out to me after they watch like demos and talk to partners is that they say they really liked the account team that they were working with, and conversely, the opposite is true. Like if they don't get a good vibe from them, if they're maybe like even like kind of disrespectful when answering questions, like we don't want to work with them. And it's crazy that people forget about that. Why don't we talk a little bit about scale? Because, I think SoundCloud does over 100 million messages or something like that, and you have hundreds of campaigns. What sort of made you confident that this new platform you were going to choose could actually support it? What did you do, like sandbox testing, or did you do like pilot, or was it just really their track record? Like, how did you think about, were you kind of worried that they wouldn't be able to handle it? Like,
Yeah,
tell us about that.
it's a great question. And in my time at CNN, like I've seen where scale makes the thing go down many, many, many times. So coming into SoundCloud, that's like a fear in the back of my mind. Is it going to scale? Because again, I'd had an experience where it doesn't many times. So for when we were going through this process, it was understanding who your current clients are in the vendor, right? So, but even like when I was looking at the population set that I was going to use, right? I actually had a number of vendors from Southeast Asia on my list, because my thought process there is like, well, if you're based out of India and you have clients who are dealing with all the people in India, you probably can handle my scale. So that was sort of some of my rationale there. Not all of my consideration set was from India, but I mean, I would say probably like, I had at least at 1.3, and I was looking initially at 7, right? So that was a piece of it. But I think the other thing, at least specifically with MoEngage, so MoEngage has other music streaming clients in India, right? So they have, and I'm just asking about that, right? So, well, how big is, I think Ghana is one in India. Well, kind of a comparable size to what we're doing, although it's all in India. They have like at least 3 that I saw. They have some others outside of India, but from a scale perspective, I mean, that was a good sign. I did reference calls, so Logan allowed me to speak with the music streamer in India who has a similar type of scale. So that all helped me develop confidence, because again, we had a very short timeline. I mean, I was doing demos in September. I mean, we were taking, contracts in October because we had to get off in mid-January. If I had lots of time and previous RFPs, I had done sandboxes. Like when I did RFP at CNN, I had 3 different, I had 4 vendors. One said, we're not going to do a sandbox. So they knocked themselves out. The other 3 did do sandboxes. And I've done that before. And it's super helpful because it gets people hands-on and, yeah, I do like this and no, I don't like this. So completely see the value in doing a sandbox. I just didn't have a lot of time.
Yeah, the timeline is pretty wild. I can imagine like being part of that project, let alone running it and knowing the timelines that you had to deal with there. But one thing I wanted to ask you about that you chatted with Scott in the webinar that you did with him. I think you mentioned that it was like over 200 plus campaigns, like automated workflows that you had to move from the old platform into MoEngage in like 12 weeks once you picked MoEngage. A lot of teams in your shoes would have just been like, all right, let's just shift the existing logic into the new spot. Let's not worry about like fixing or sunsetting stuff. Let's just like move it all over. Let's save time there. Honestly, I think that maybe that's what I would have done. It's what I've done in the past. You didn't do this at all. Like in those 12 weeks, you improved and redid a lot of the strategy for the messaging and the campaigns. What was your framework for deciding what are we keeping, what are we rewriting, and what are we kind of sunsetting? And how did this all kind of come together? Was there like a holy crap, this might actually fail moment during the sprint? Like, walk us through that.
Yeah, no, I mean, it really, the Lifecycle, so it was actually this part of it, the Lifecycle team really took ownership of. So they had spreadsheets with all the different campaigns. We had over 200 campaigns. We had been our previous platform for 7 years. We had like over 200 campaigns that we had. Things were dated, right? So I completely understand where you're coming from, but we decided to take this as an opportunity to have a new template. So we got a new template created. We wanted to get all this information into the new template. As far as like how we did this, we ranked all of our campaigns like priorities. We applied a 0 to maybe 3, and we had them, ranked that way. We actually paid Mo Engage extra to help us migrate. So Mo Engage used their resources and teams that they had to essentially shift campaigns, put them into our new templates, and then we were the final approvers. So, without that, because our lifecycle team at the time were 3 people. We wouldn't have been able to do that. But super helpful. Again, we paid extra for it, but it was money well spent. So that was sort of how we approached that. But I guess why didn't we just do a lift and shift? It's one of those things. I think 1 week we thought we could do it. What we had was so old and dated. It's like, well, if we're gonna start new, get the sort of like a MVP, get the minimal viable product, minimal viable email messaging out there, use a new template, use a new, setup, and then kind of keep going over time. And to some extent, that's what we did. So, our previous contract cut off January 19th. It was done. But, or it took us a while to get we were live again on the new plan, Motigage, January 19th. It took us some time to get everything up to parity. So I'm not saying we got complete parity at January 19th. We didn't. It took us some time, but we got to the point where the MVP messages, like those, those tier 0 messages that we absolutely had to have, they were live in the platform. So, and that's not only emails, but it's also in apps, it's pushes. We were testing all of that.
Yeah. Love that. And I will say too, like when it comes to migrations, there's almost an opportunity to see if can campaigns be made better?
Mhm.
It's kind of like when you're moving to a new house, kind of like, hey, do we need all this stuff?
Exactly.
And then when you get to the new house, it's like, maybe we can put stuff in a different way that's actually better. So that really resonates
Mhm.
with me. How about we talk about the roles and your team like after the migration? After you implemented Mo Engage, did it change the way that you worked? Did it change people's roles? Did you have to hire people, or some people maybe could change jobs because the tooling was different? Tell us a little bit
Mhm.
about that.
Yeah, no, I would say that the team, not only the members of the team, but what they did changed dramatically. So in our old platform, even though our old partner vendor had a drag and drop editor, we didn't use it. So we had a CRM team of essentially 3 people. One of those members left sort of midway through. So we had essentially 2 members officially on the Lifecycle team, and they were hard coding HTML. So they were very reactive. They did a great job considering, but their day was very much about, I have lots of different requests coming at me. I'm hard coding these HTML emails, and how do I get them out? Right. So it was that was their day. Today, I would say our CRM team is probably about 7 people. So one of those 2 members is now leading the team. So she was promoted. She's now director. She's leading the team. We have a senior analyst on the team helping with campaign data, which he didn't have previously. We have someone who's working on various flows, testing AI, thinking about new ways that we can engage our users. We have we have another person who is, helping with campaign management, working with other folks around. We talked about how it's really a product, getting all those things in. So we have, the team is really, I don't want to say ballooned because sometimes that's sort of a negative connotation, but we definitely were able to identify roles that are super helpful to what our end goal is, which is, encouraging engagement, getting subscriptions. We were able to identify roles that would help us do that we definitely didn't have before. Before we had 2 people And then when we started doing the migration, we did add a contractor. They were coding email, HTML, and their day was very, very different. So yeah, the team is dramatically different. The lifecycle team itself, yeah, for sure.
Super cool to hear. I think like you also said it in our pre-interview chat that like data democratization, like getting data into the hands of as much people as possible is something you're really passionate about. Post migration, this was like one of the main reasons for doing this, right? Like getting better data and activating that and giving other folks like the tools to do that. Let's chat about like the customer data picture after the migration and now like 1 year into it. I know SoundCloud uses BigQuery as the data warehouse. What processes or guardrails do you think were helpful that you put in place that let marketers go a bit crazy or run their own segmentation lists and campaigns on top of BigQuery pushed into MoEngage? Did that kind of introduce risks at first or like reduce tech debt? Curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so something I didn't say explicitly, but when we moved on to MoEngage, we left HTML behind, and we now use a drag and drop editor. So when you think about that, it opens up the playing field tremendously, because now you don't need to know HTML to be able to craft a message. So guardrails. So we actually have people who are not part of Lifecycle who will go in and write messages. However, the Lifecycle team is the one who activates them. So that allows us to have someone who knows deeply the system to be able to say, okay, yeah, this looks good. I'm going to send it live. Oh, wait a minute, this audience isn't quite right, or we need to add this, and they can do all of that. So that's essentially the guardrails that we have in place. Is the drag and drop editor truly opened it up. So now knowing HTML is not a blocker. Anyone can use our drag and drop editor to craft an email, but we still have people who know how things are going to work. Also, like, what else is out there, and are we going to have, are we going to have too many things going on? We have that level of expertise that is the one actually launching. So that's sort of what we've done to help that piece of it. I think from a data perspective, I mean, I was looking in preparation for this. I was looking to see how many people we had in MoEngage, and we have probably, I think it was like 135 people in MoEngage.
Wow.
And again, SoundCloud is like 425 people. So obviously we don't have 135 people on our CRM team. These are folks coming from all over the place. So these are data engineers in there. These are people going in there to look at analytics, to see what's all sorts of things, right? So, but again, that's sort of, like our beginning of our conversation. MoEngage, but this whole customer engagement platform is it's a part of the product. And lots of different people have interests and are stakeholders and are using it. And it could be all sorts of stuff. So if I think about data democratization, yes, we feed everything into BigQuery. So, and this is actually kind of interesting too. And when you think about data, yes, we have our customer engagement platform, but I also manage our performance marketing team, our marketing analytics team. I deal with SEO. So lots of data everywhere. So something that we shifted to, and actually AppsFlyer was the first one we went live with this approach, but we did the same thing with MoEngage. We essentially get all of our events using server to server. So we have a forked version of like open source segment code that we're using to get events. So we have that. It feeds all our events into BigQuery, and then we now use high touch on top of BigQuery to send those events. So that's sort of the process we're moving towards. AppsFlyer was sort of the first, because AppsFlyer, we did build some custom integrations to send our events from BigQuery out to AppsFlyer, but we're probably going to be migrating that to high touch in the upcoming months. But that said, I mean, everything is going to BigQuery. That's our source of truth. And then we're sending it out to all the different platforms. So we're not using like the native integrations for SDKs, right? So we have the minimums, like I need to have an SDK in my app to get the MoEngage user ID, but all my events are coming from BigQuery. And I know I talked about in the beginning, trying to use out of the box as much as possible. Well, these tools allow us to do this. I mean, it's just a different way of doing an implementation. It's not super custom where like MoEngage is like, yeah, you could do that, but you're crazy. It was something that we could do, but it also, not that I'm trying to switch vendors, but it makes it easier because all of our data is kind of handled the same way and being pushed out to all of our platforms, so like AppsFlyer, MoEngage, GA4, sort of in the same way. So it makes life easier.
Can I ask a quick question about like audience selection and audience building? So it's like the audience is in BigQuery, and then do you what do marketers and the other 135 people that use the tool, like how do they select, like what tool do they use to actually select the audience for these messages?
So that's a great question. And when I think audiences, so yes, I'm managing a Martech stack, but the other hat I wear on a daily basis is our performance marketing team. So audiences in both places, right? So if we're talking about MoEngage, we have a couple things going on. So one, we are definitely using MoEngage's some segmentation capabilities to create audiences there. So we definitely do that. So actually, MoEngage built something called warehouse segments. We were like the beta, like I don't know, development candidate for that. I remember during our sales pitches, our CPO at the time was like, we don't want to move data anywhere. And the way we first got sort of to make that true was using High Touch. So MoEngage actually introduced us to High Touch. High Touch is a reverse ETL tool. It sits on top of BigQuery, and MoEngage already had connectors with High Touch, so that allowed us easily to be able to get data to MoEngage that we can act on, right? So that was sort of the first thing. But the second part of that was, and it initially was called Cloud Sync. MoEngage built warehouse segments, which allows us to go into the MoEngage UI, write SQL queries to build segments in our BigQuery and interact that way. So we actually, if I'm thinking about segmentation for messages, we actually do it both ways. We either use the MoEngage drag and drop editor or drag and drop tool to build a segment that way, or we will use SQL in the MoEngage UI to build segments that way. If I put my performance marketer hat on, we're actually moving towards a way where we are building audiences BigQuery itself and then using High Touch to send it to my various endpoints. So like we're already sending audiences from BigQuery via High Touch to like DV360, where I think Ben is there, TikTok. So my goal is I don't want to be building the same audience 5 times, right? That just adds all sorts of room for error. But with messaging and MoEngage being what it is, I don't want to add like artificial burden to say, well, you have to use the BigQuery High Touch, methodology to create an audience. It just makes sense to create the audience natively in MoEngage. So I think that's always going to be the case. But outside of that, I want my audiences in BigQuery. I want to create them once, and then I want to be able to use something like High Touch to send them wherever I need them. So that's sort of the 2 different ways I'm thinking about audiences.
It's so cool to hear, Hope. Like, we're working with MoEngage on like figuring out what's going to be the ad on the podcast, and right around the time where we were doing that, they had just announced the warehouse native stuff, and we talk a lot about, Daryl and I, warehouse native tech. Like we're really deep into that space, and I was like, I think our audience is going to be really curious to hear that the new features you're rolling out, you're kind of calling the customer engagement platform warehouse native. You're sitting on top of the warehouse, and so I feel like we could have done a whole podcast on just customer data and the whole landscape shifting with reverse ETL tools there. But this has been such a fun conversation. It's flown by. I really appreciate you sitting down with us. We got one last question for you. You're a team leader, director of product management, but you're also a frequent speaker. You're an avid reader and a news junkie, like you said a few times. One question we ask everyone on the show is, how do you remain happy and successful in your career? And how do you find balance between all the things you're working on while staying happy?
So I really enjoy what I do. I mean, and I've been at companies where I couldn't have said the same, right? So I've been places where maybe the compensation was great, that, I don't like to be micromanaged. Yeah, I'm being micromanaged every day. But I got my MD out of that. So there could be other reasons, but was I happy? No, not really. Here, I truly enjoy what I do. I enjoy the different, experiences I get. I mean, at heart, I mentioned I'm an information junkie. I also call myself a generalist. Sometimes my manager corrects me and says I'm a fixer, and I'll take either one. But I like seeing how I like knowing a lot of different things about different areas. I like seeing them come together, and I'm able to do that here at SoundCloud. So that makes me happy. And it's not that necessarily a workaholic or anything like that, but I just enjoy like the tech, like what is happening today. what is Google doing to, like, my performance marketing hat on? That's a big one, right? How do I get the most I possibly can out of whatever DSP, and this will be demand side platform DSP that I'm using, right? So those are all things that I enjoy, and that makes me happy. So I do have really good, I think, work-life balance, although sometimes, as I mentioned earlier, I stay up way too late reading. But, other than that, I find, I guess I find enjoyment/happiness in, like, my day-to-day. And that, again, hasn't always been the case for me. I've been there, I've been in those situations. And now my situation now, obviously much preferable.
Very cool. What are you reading right now, or what's something you read recently that you loved?
So I read a lot of, I'd probably say junk fiction. I mean, like, people watch random movies. I read random books. So that's what I do. But like, authors, I'm reading some. I'm starting a book right now, Marian Keyes. And this is probably like a contemporary, but it was written in 1996. Contemporary romance. All sorts of stuff. I do not read nonfiction. I'm not going to be, I read the classics. That's not me. I'm usually reading trashy fiction, but again, it's what I enjoy. So, yeah.
Love it. Awesome. Hope, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate you sitting down with us.
No, thank you for having me. This is great.
So I recently got my hands on the 2025 AI and Marketing Performance Index. This is research conducted by Growth Loop and Ascend2. They surveyed like 300 plus senior marketers across North America. And the report showed this really interesting disconnect between the hype around AI and the real world that marketers are working in today. A lot of teams still struggle with things like performance and speed. In the report, you'll discover things like how teams are leveraging AI within their current marketing cycles, from audience segmentation to insights, how marketers think about the AI and human partnership within their existing stacks, and the biggest hurdles marketers face with adopting AI and ways that they're overcoming them. Grab your copy at go.growthloop.com/report. The #1 conference for marketing ops and revenue ops professionals is back again this year. Block off your calendars from October 27th to the 29th in Anaheim, California. Grab your tickets at mopsapalooza.com while you enjoy some of the highlights from last year.
This event is legit.
Mopsapalooza is different because it's a practitioner's event.
Everybody learns from each other.
It's not a bunch of sales pitches.
This is the users community.
This year, we had over 300 submissions to speak. The sessions were selected and voted on by every single one of you. Marketing ops isn't just marketing. It's about so much more than that.
It's about getting inspired by each other to drive impactful change.
And when MoPros are fully aligned with broader business goals, we become the true driver of growth.
It is going to be an exciting few years ahead, and I really do believe that marketing ops is going to be at the absolute center of this.
See what's going on in the industry. You want to be on top of your game, this is the conference to come to.
It's the place to be. It's easily the best conference that you're going to go to all year.
Community is completely next level.